Today I'll be reviewing Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, published in 1878 in its complete edition. Keep in mind that the novel, like many novels in the 19th century, were serialized into installments in journals before being published outright in its complete product, which plays a factor in how I'll be discussing the book. I went back and forth between two translations, most prominently the Rosemary Edmonds translation from 1954, and what's known as the P&V translation from 2000. I found the Edmonds translation to be far more dense, less conversational, and more British. I found the P&V translation to be a little too modern and colloquial, more informal. Anyway, those are the two preliminaries I wanted to get out of the way before I started. I will be spoiling the entire novel from here on out, so you've been warned. So, for the past couple years, I've had a hard time reading modern literary fiction. I suppose this started in 2019 and has persisted regularly. Instead, I have read books that take place predominantly in the 19th century. I've been trying to make my way through Ulysses, and to me, that book is really sort of one of the dividing lines for literature in its history. Another opinion I sort of have, which would likely be unpopular, is that the power and influence of literature pretty much died after Ulysses. From there, influence is a story of radio, film, television, video games, and so on. This is in some ways not true at all, as plenty of people still read and still love to read, but what I would like to say is that the zeitgeist of people gathering together to discuss a novel in the closest thing to monoculture is something we really do not have unless we actively make or join a book club or happen to still be in school. The 19th century really was the height of the novel, and we saw in it an incredible amount of creativity in the design of these things, with romanticism and naturalism and realism as it moved into modernism and sort of immolated itself into extremely dense and academic prose before relying on design choices from innovations in psychology and technology. So, I guess I find a great pleasure in reading books from the 19th century as I am trying to get back to a point where creativity trumped salesmanship. Anna Karenina is regarded as one of the best novels of all time. It's a huge book covering several years, numerous characters, but it is focused primarily on the affairs of several couples as they maneuver through a period of great change in Russian society. Like the United States and other nations, the 19th century was a long, drawn-out period of the after-effects of the Enlightenment, where several nations had significant revolutions in the name of humanism, but we were still unsure of what popular sovereignty meant, and we were unsure of who exactly was considered equal. The United States fought a civil war and freed slaves, and Russia eliminated serfdom at the shockingly similar years of the early 1860s. Anna Karenina takes place years after, where the modernization of Russia came with it intense questions, not just of technology and labor, but of society and one's role in it. As such, Anna Karenina stands poised as the ideal novel to discuss how love and romance might be reevaluated in this new light. The novel begins with Oblonsky, Anna's brother, who has just been discovered as having an affair with his governess, to the humiliation of his wife, Dolly. Dolly is a sister of Kitty, both as members of the Sherbatskaya family. I'm just going to apologize for mispronouncing the names of these characters right here. The different audio versions of the book that I listened to occasionally as I went on also pronounced these names differently, so I'm actually not quite sure where to go from here. Kitty is very eligible as someone to be courted and wedded, and she has her eyes set out on two suitors. One is Count Vronsky, an incredibly dashing and elegant young officer who, often, is remarked upon as having very fine teeth. The other option is Levin, a childhood friend of Kitty, who presides over his father's estate and tends to love rural life for its no-nonsense immediacy. Kitty is young and impressionable, and so has been swept up by the gaze of Vronsky. When Kitty meets Anna Karenina for the first time, you get the sense that Kitty looks up to Anna as an elegant woman as well, who she might aspire to as being a woman of society in the urban life of Moscow and St. Petersburg. Kitty is so enamored by Anna's presence that she asks Anna to come to the next ball, It's clear that Kitty needs Anna there as a surrogate, so that she might match her older and more womanly charms. Unfortunately, this backfires. As soon as Anna meets Vronsky, and vice versa, there is an immediate attachment that Kitty realizes, and one that sends Kitty into a mental breakdown. Levin, who had come to the city to propose to Kitty, fell prey to bad timing, as Kitty had turned him down just before this fatal ball. This is the sort of setup that we have for the most important plots of the novel. Oblonsky is sort of a dumb frat boy, but he feels deeply for his wife Dolly, though that does not stop him from continuing to have numerous affairs. Dolly has resigned herself to maintaining stability in the family by being the mother, though when she interacts with married couples later, she cannot help but feel empathy for others who have affairs, as well as anger and regret that she had not taken an opportunity when she could have. Anna and Vronsky, of course, wind up together, and their quest to maintain their relationship under the watchful eye of Anna's husband, Karenin, a deeply sterile and legalistic man, forms the backbone of the conflict in their relationship. The question of divorce is one that will maintain itself until the bitter end. Though Kitty is obliterated in high society, she eventually goes abroad and revitalizes herself, becoming, in effect, an ideal woman in spirit who would find great pleasure as the wife of Levin. Levin tries again to have her in marriage, which Kitty accepts, and the wedding, early years, and firstborn child are discussed in great detail. In each of these plots, we have what marriage and relationships look like in a Russia in social turmoil, having to address the traditions of the past with the progressive reforms of the present into an unclear future. The novel's style feels like a bridge between worlds as well. Like Tolstoy's War and Peace, the novel is a huge bricolage of romance, politics, and psychology. It has some prototypes of such aspects as the leitmotif from Wagner's music, to some work identifying the use of flashback before the existence of film. It has both the romantic outcomes of marriage and childbearing, while also supplying a darker and more modern overtone to when marriage collapses. It contains an ostentatious amount of asides into everything, from the role of the peasants and education, to the pleasures of mowing the lawn. I suppose I can begin my critique here, by wondering who the novel is exactly for. For the grandiose and politics and romance, I feel as though Tolstoy had largely conquered it in War and Peace. In that novel, I felt a great deal of love and affection for Maria Bolkonskaya, as her plight felt particularly heart-wrenching, and her duty to her family and the estate as one more curse upon her that parochial societies were very good at waging. I think the multifaceted work of Anna Karenina seems to expose more problems than it does provide a commentary, like War and Peace, and I'd like to spend most of the remaining time discussing them now. Because as much as I wanted to like Anna Karenina for its reputation, I just could not engage like I wanted to. Most of the best moments for me occurred in the first third of the book, where Tolstoy was able to bring about these excellent quotations that reminded me of truths I did not realize I had. One of the most important ones for me was about how Levin offered his respect to a person he did not like, and the more respect he offered, the more he ended up hating this person. To me, this rings as incredibly true. What hurts about this kind of false respect is twofold. First, that the person we give it to can sometimes never ever suspect that something is up, that they never suspect we do not like them. Sometimes, like in the 2022 film Banshees of Inisherin, this base-level respect, day in and day out, can rot out the core of a relationship. Many friends and family never explicitly interrogate the dynamics of a relationship, never really ask how close they are and what separates them from a greater intimacy. Second, that the respect we offer them can sometimes reveal something about our family or friends that we do not like. Sometimes this acquiescence in conversation will give this friend the opportunity to go one step further, and they begin to say things or do things that strike us as ridiculous or absurd. So anyway, there are a couple of lines like that, where I do feel the novel speaks to us to this day. Unfortunately, the book is over 800 pages, and the power of these lines can come best from a context that feels true too. But I think that Tolstoy was unclear about that truth. In so many parts of the novel, there are moments that I wanted him to expound upon, while others I wanted either shortened or cut. In that way, the novel feels simultaneously too long and too short. I truly do not care about Levin's pleasure for mowing, so having entire chapters dedicated to the task strikes me as fundamentally ridiculous, especially considering the progression of the plot does not supply any answers to his enlightenment later. On the other hand, The power of Anna and Vronsky's affair is literally the titular aspect of this novel. Yet Tolstoy does not seem able to get inside the heads of his characters enough to provide meaningful reasons for why this affair starts or continues. We get very little about their upbringing as children, and are only barely aware much later in the novel that Karenin was an orphan. In a typical tragedy, we can see that Anna is at the top of her game. She is the talk of society, wedded to a man rising in the ranks of Russian politics, and yet she is willing to throw it all away for passion. Her behavior by the end of the novel is one of complete psychosis. Her suicide under the train is haunting in its immediate telling, but in thinking about it later, we needed more of an understanding of how Anna would place herself in an inescapable situation. The reason for this is obvious. Tolstoy himself is quite similar to Levin, and his relationship with Kitty has quite a few autobiographical inserts. As such, these sections turn out to be of surprising depth and quality. The problems that the two have early on in their marriage are details that I wanted with Anna and Vronsky, but the latter two are often described like gods in some mythology. The lowest point for me is perhaps when the two are traveling abroad, and Vronsky is attempting to be a painter. They visit a famous modern painter, and the resulting conversation is so bloated and abstract, it may as well not even be in there. In fact, I think it would be most fun for a group of people in a book club to place the entirety of the novel on a Google Doc, and go turn by turn for what sections to delete. I honestly think an abridged version of Anna Karenina would have been something I would have enjoyed far more. Luckily, Vronsky is described with enough contradictory behaviors that he feels somewhat approachable and human, but Anna to me is a mystery. Perhaps that is why the book has survived and thrived for so long, particularly as a work that has been adapted in numerous ways. Attempting to capture whatever it is that Anna has strikes me as an impossible task. Anna is simultaneously serene and an hysteric. She is also a mother of deep passion and also indifferent cruelty. And therefore, by the end of the novel, my wife and I had come to the conclusion that she had latent mental health concerns that were never addressed, and reached a fatal peak that killed her. This does not strike me as a good outcome of the novel. I'm not suggesting that we necessarily have to have reasons for the affair, because I have seen and read enough to know that the reasons may be ephemeral. What I lacked in the novel is her impressions of the world, of her closest friends and relations, of her past. In more modern works, like The Awakening by Kate Chopin, we are able to see as Miss Pontellier sees. In Madame Bovary, we know enough of Emma Renault to know of how her early ideas of romance and chivalry turn into the dull tedium of parochial existence, and so her mind wanders. With Anna, I felt neither the inside intuitions of The Awakening, nor the outside polemic of Bovary. Both of those novels do far better than what Anna Karenina was attempting to do. Much of the politics of the novel strike us as outdated or place us out of context. I could never know what problems existed that would make Levin turn down the idea of universal education or providing rights for women to work and to vote. I do not know why he feels so strongly that peasants should be maintained as such, despite his empathy with their simplistic work ethic. So, as a result, many of the conversations about land ownership and usage, about city politics, may as well fall on deaf ears. In that way, Anna Karenina was likely far better for contemporary readers. To me, it felt as though the novel was like binge-watching an entire series. I tried to imagine what it must have felt like to have read the novel in installments, and then to put my best dress on and go to the parlors and drawing rooms of Moscow and St. Petersburg, and talk with other ladies about Anna's adventures, with pangs of longing and jealousy and derision, and obviously to speculate on whether I was on Team Vronsky or Team Levin. Like all men, I want to be a Levin, but assume that I am a Vronsky, a person who is capable of doing several things, but none of them well, and is able to flirt only as long as I have hair left on my head. Much of the parts of the novel end in such trumped-up twists and shocks that it felt like a television show in design. One example being the end of Part 5, where Anna decides to attend a ball and is rejected by her friends. As you can tell, Part 5 is where I really had a hard time, as it also contains the Italy portion we discussed before. But it highlights for me some of the context in which this novel was released. One cannot read the novel and not think of a television show like Game of Thrones, where an ensemble cast is progressing inch by inch at a glacial pace to some inevitable conclusion. For the most part, The 19th century has been very good to me. Imagining that Melville and Whitman both wrote Moby Dick and Leaves of Grass, respectively, so close together in time and place, that Wagner wrote his incredible opera about Germanic and Norse myths and performed it in its entirety in 1876, the works of the Bronte sisters and Hawthorne. I could just go on and on. These novels reveal themselves to be the works of profoundly creative people. But in both of Tolstoy's works of War and Peace and Anna Karenina, I have had a middling response. They lack the sort of focus of other works, yet to me have such an openness that they reveal weak spots of the author's knowledge set that the future was easily able to lay bare. I think Anna Karenina was best read in its time, which is something I would not say about the other works I have mentioned in this review. I am proud of the work I did in putting these books behind me, but knowing what I know now, I would have spent that time reading Middlemarch by Eliot or Bleak House by Charles Dickens, which is where I want to go next. If you have listened this far, I'm grateful for the time you've given me. Thanks for listening.